Name for the order?
I have two different ones. Laura Chapman and Betsy Fisher.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. Hey yo.
Hey yo.
Well, yeah, the problem was you were out of internet.
Oh yeah, duh.
Yeah.
Alright, cool.
Right?
Bet.
Betsy.
Sit down with Larry Elder. Anyway.
Doesn't be playing it while the person is putting stuff in it.
The last three digits of the Fisher.
Yeah, Fisher is 720 and. Okay. I got you.
Good thing we cleaned out the car.
Well, did it for a reason. Just imagine.
I really can't fight it.
You really can't.
What am I supposed to do then?
Oh my god, DJ. Do your daily chest pistol.
No.
The governor of California will also be a leader in the nation. We want to address that.
Pissed.
So the question I would ask next is, among conservatives, there is a growing quorum who distrust election.
That's ridiculous, Christopher.
So is the world.
What am I supposed to do then?
Twitter. I'm sorry? Sure.
Is there enough room for it? Yeah, just right over here is cool. That's not close. Can you close that? You got it. More than half of the time, the food is already and make millions of dollars.
So that makes it worth it?
Yes, actually. Yes, actually. It does.
It's considered extremely rude to pump political opinions out of a speakerphone into public.
Turning it down isn't pumping anything. Having it, that's 100% okay.
I do not like dealing with bad vibes of random.
That's your problem.
LOL.
It's not happening anymore.
But
And if you have a fucking problem, you can divorce me or make a good argument.
And election officials, including in California. Do you believe Joe California will also be a leader in the nation? we want to address that. So the question I would ask next is, among conservatives, there is a growing quorum who distrust elections and election officials, including in California. Do you believe Joe Biden won the 2020 election freely and fairly? And do you trust in the integrity and validity of California's elections process?
I do believe that Joe Biden won the election fairly and squarely, but can I say something about that? I know Donald Trump has been accused of fomenting the big lie. If I had a nickel every time I watch CNN, and I watch a lot of CNN, I watch Chris Cuomo and Don Lemon and Wolf Blitzer. If I had a dime every time they suspected poll, 66% of Democrats believe that the Russians changed vote tallies. One falsely believing that there was, quote, widespread voter fraud in the 2020 election. 76% Republicans, he said, believes this lie. 78% of Democrats believe that the Russians, quote, changed the outcome of the election, close quote, in 2016, even though the Senate reporting any evidence whatsoever that the Russians changed the vote, changed the outcome of the election or not. Yet 78% of Democrats, according to Gallup, believe that the outcome of the election was changed by the Russian interference in 2016. Yet Hillary's social media was never shut down, even though she was promoting the big lie. Social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook never shut her down, even though she was promoting the big lie. Now, when I say that, people push back and say, well, Hillary conceded the election, Donald Trump did not. Google Donald Trump and concede, and you'll find numerous articles where Donald Trump conceded the election. I filed a separate motion to have the recount done by hand. Third, Hillary's supporters did not storm the Capitol on January 6th. That is true, because Hillary was not president on January 6th. But on election night in November 2016, there was widespread violence on the part of Hillary supporters all over America, including clashes with the police, including police cars being burned. And on the third week of January in 2017, when Donald Trump was inaugurated, 200 people were arrested in Washington, D.C. because of upgraded over that. And finally, Donald Trump took it. I think there's a double standard here, and I wish the media would acknowledge that.
I'm going to go to...
Yes, welcome to the pattern of this video, Deidre. Uppity, bitch-ass liberal reporter nigger. Okay, sorry, YouTube.
You're lucky. Be silent 3 seconds right after he finishes on his own.
Yeah.
That's how wrecked they are.
Yeah.
It's fucking insane.
The more adept ones be like answering more quickly.
Yeah,
Wonderful and glorious.
The double standard here, and I wish the media would acknowledge that.
I'm going to go to Yusuf Bey next, but Donald Trump, well into Obama's presidency, promoted the lie that he was not born in the United States.
May I respond to that? Sidney Blumenthal, during the campaign, and Sidney Blumenthal told him that Barack Obama was from Africa, to the point where Asher put a reporter to track down the rumor, found no basis for the rumor whatsoever. And I'm not saying Donald Trump did not promote this birther business, and I never supported it. I condemned it when I was on the air, but the original person that pushed the birther lie was Sidney Blumenthal.
You're raising with Hillary Clinton and what happened at the Capitol on January 6th. There are multiple police
want to put it back in landscape.
Yeah, I prefer it in landscape mode.
But you should put it back in.
What?
You might want to put it back in landscape.
Fairly. And do you trust in the integrity?
On January 6th, that is true. Campaign, particularly Sidney Blumenthal, and one of your reporters named James. Was approached
Yusuf Bey.
Hi, Larry. You said that.
in major cities all over America the several days after Donald Trump won the election in November, and there was as well.
Footsteps in D.C. There's a completely.
Why do people ignore the part where he said peacefully? To act as if Donald Trump put a red flag in front of people and said, "Go trash the Capitol building," to me is quite unfair.
Okay. Well, let's change to something else to talk about.
Sure.
Counties throughout California are reimposing mask mandates, with the Delta variant now accounting for 83% of new infections and almost all hospitalizations.
In your
It's not telling you which one is which. Because it's not telling you what's on what order, and he didn't tell us, so.
Wow.
Is there a sticker somewhere? Okay, we're at Chapman.
have about the minimum wage, they probably would react to it well. I would point out that there was editorial in 1987 in the New York Times, an editorial, not op-ed piece, and the headline is "Correct Minimum Wage 0.
Gonna be like $7 for some stuff.
All over America, the several days after Donald Trump won the election in November, the third week of January in 2017, people ignored the part where he said peacefully. To act as if Donald Trump put a red flag in front of people and said,
Well, DoorDash fucked up those orders like fuck, but we still got a $6 bonus.
Anyway, you don't need to give me...
Because I didn't need.
So, I thought I could just tell you where it was, since you didn't know. Obviously, I was trying to help. You started looking, I saw you and see that wasn't the right one, then you looked across the street. And
So then I was pretty frustrated that you felt you needed to butt in.
Well, now your two options are either go that way or go that way. So I was telling you, you can go it's that way. If it's not across the street, your two options are either it's that way or that way.
Yeah, and then that was also frustrating because I couldn't see you.
I was still just trying to help. You don't have to give me the fucking death stare.
I'm sorry that I got upset.
I figured it out yourself. Yes, I was just trying to help you do that sooner.
I appreciate that. I just...
No, you don't. No, you don't. But it's whatever.
"Go trash the Capitol building," to me is quite unfair.
Many Republicans flout public health rules and try to discredit experts like Dr. Fauci and agencies like the CDC. As governor, would you follow the guidance of experts? And if the FDA...
I seem to remember remember last time we had some sort of problem using their pickup order system.
I don't. Okay. $10.76 for our sweet and sour sauce and 4 egg rolls.
How much is your sweet and sour sauce?
$2.
Is that
The big one.
the small one isn't enough?
Fully approved vaccine in the coming months, would you support a vaccine requirement for all eligible Californians?
I would not support a vaccine mandate. I would not support a mask mandate. I have been vaccinated. I believe vaccines work. I'm an old man. I have comorbidities. I support people to get the vaccine. But in California, virtually everybody who wants to get the vaccine has been able to get one. Poor people can get the vaccine for free. So a lot of people have made the choice, rightly or wrongly, not to get a vaccine. And I think in America, you ought to have that choice.
Jack Oman, I'm the Deputy California Opinion Editor and editorial cartoonist. Mr. Elder, thanks for joining us.
Pleasure.
In your torrent of words, you said earlier that torrent. You said that George Soros.
When you start out by saying torrent of words, it sounds to me like the sentence is not going to end well. But let's go.
You said that you used the phrase George Soros appointed DAs.
I think I said supported, but if I said appointed, I made a mistake. He funded them.
Did other people fund those races, such as Gaston Jones and Boudin's?
I don't know exactly who paid what. My impression is, without George Soros's money, probably neither one of them would have been elected. Gascon replaced a black female DA in LA, the first black female we ever had, and in my opinion, but for his money, she likely would have gotten reelected.
Okay, but what's the implication here? That George Soros?
Well, the implication is that George Soros, these DAs are soft on crime. They believe in cashless bail. That's why they're facing recall elections. That's why DAs in San Francisco and DAs in Los Angeles are both hopping mad at both of them. And that's one of the reasons I believe that crime has gone up in those two cities.
You're on record as calling for the end to the minimum wage, saying, quote, the correct minimum wage ought to be zero.
Right.
How do you think California voters currently earning the minimum wage, which is $13 to $14 an hour, would react to that?
Well, given the indoctrination that people have about the minimum wage, they probably would react to it well. I would point out that there was an editorial in 1987 in the New York Times, an editorial, not op-ed piece, and the headline is correct minimum wage 0.00. And they made all the economic 101 arguments. That is, that when you arbitrarily increase the cost of labor, all sorts of bad consequences come from that. People's hours are cut back. A hiring decision is deferred. Prices of goods go up in order to compensate for that forced increase in labor, which is usually the biggest cost in running any kind of business. Milton Friedman, the Nobel laureate economist, who was a friend of mine, said that he believes that the minimum wage was, quote, the most anti-Negro law on the statute books, close quote, because at one time, believe it or not, a black teenager was more likely to be employed than a white teenager, more likely to be employed than a white adult, more likely to be employed than a black adult, because that teenager was able to sell his labor for less. When you come in with the minimum wage, you are foreclosing the ability of people, often with little education and little skills, to get a job. I never have quite understood why a third party like government, why that government feels it's anybody's business what my relationship is with an individual who willingly sold his labor, and my relationship with that person when I willingly bought that labor. Why two people who are adults can't determine what the price of labor ought to be is beyond me. And why a third party feels it's his or her business to interfere with that is also beyond me. I'd also like to say this about the minimum wage. I was not at this meeting, but the governor, the mayor of Los Angeles is Eric Garcetti. Eric Garcetti went to the London School of Economics. He didn't study economics. He studied ethnic studies, which you think even by osmosis, he might pick up something from Adam Smith or from some of the books that might be lying around. When the minimum wage was proposed to be raised to $12 an hour, he brought in a bunch of business people. And I know this because 2 or 3 of them called my radio show and said 20 or 30 of us were invited to this meeting, and all of us came in with our profit and loss statements. We all told him that our profit margins were razor thin, and when you're forcing us to raise labor, raise the cost of labor, we're going to have to lay off some people, we're going to have to defer hiring decisions, we're going to have to raise prices, all of which are negative. And he said, all 3 of them told me independently that Eric Garcetti listened very intently, stood up, buttoned his coat, and said to these people that are working 60, 70, 80 hours a week, because if you run a small business, you can't work 9 to 5. He stood up, buttoned his coat, and said, I believe you can absorb the cost. Now, as far as I know, this guy has never even run a lemonade stand telling hardworking businessmen and women, I'm going to jack up your price of labor, and you're just going to be able to deal with it, and walks out of the room. I think that's outrageous. It's offensive to me. I studied economics. I didn't major in it, but I studied economics in college. And again, this is a very difficult thing to do, to run a small business. Almost half of them fail. Those that do succeed often run on very thin margins, run from from payroll to payroll. And for somebody who's never run a business to tell business people who are working this hard, I'm going to jack up your price of labor and you're going to deal with it, to me is offensive. So yes, the ideal minimum wage is 0.00.
All right, our next question will be asked by Stephanie Finucane.
Good morning, Mr. Elder.
Morning.
I'm Stephanie Finucane. I'm the opinion editor at the Tribune in San Luis Obispo. And I'm going to return to the topic of systemic racism. On your website, you say it's outrageous that America is being demonized as systemically racist. Yet that seems to fly in the face of what we see around us in our reporting. For example, Tad Weber just completed a series on redlining in Fresno and how it prevented Black
Hi.
Available opportunities is a bigger problem than racism, end of quote. Finally, I want to say this. I've often, in fact, more Black teens than white teens said, failure to take advantage of available opportunities is a bigger problem than racism. I want to repeat that. More Black teens than white teens said, and this is pretty much verbatim, failure to take advantage of available opportunities is a bigger problem than racism, end of quote. Finally, I want to say this. I've often said this to people who make the same arguments that you've made. I'm talking about America today. I'm talking about America that elected a Black president and re-elected the Black president, even though he supervised over one of the worst economic recoveries since 1949. Pick up your magic wand, wave it over the hearts of America. Remove every smidgen of racism from white people. Now everybody white thinks like Mother Teresa. Do we still have a situation where 70% of black children enter the world without a father married to the mother? Do we still have a situation where in many of our urban schools, there's a 50% dropout rate in high school? We still have a situation where even those in these urban high schools who do graduate can often not read, write, and compute at grade level. Do we still have a situation where the number one cause of preventable death for young white men is accidents like car accidents and drownings, whereas the number one cause of preventable death for young black boys is homicide? If the answer to those series of questions is yes, I submit to you that systemic racism is not the problem, and things like critical race theory and reparations are not the answer.
All right, panelists, be aware I'm going to go a little bit out of order so we can bring Hannah Holzer up. So Hannah Holzer will ask the next question.
Mr. Elder, my name is Hannah Holzer, and I...
In the early 60s, 200 of them were white, 200 of them were black, 75% of the white ones were Jews. I've talked about the fact that the famous movie called Mississippi Burning, which was about the, I think it was 1964 murder of 3 people, Messrs. Schwerner, Goodman, and Cheney. 2 of the 3 were Jews. I have once been called a flag-waving, Jew-loving Uncle Tom. And I've often said I'll cop the two of the 3, but not the third one. So for you to imply that somehow I'm being anti-Semitic is offensive to me. But coming from the Sacramento Bee that supported this man, that supported my opponent, and that believes that the recall election is a waste of time, I'm not surprised.
Okay, thank you for your answer. I'm going to move on to the second question, unless anyone has any follow-ups.
All right.
Thanks. In July, you tweeted out a story about a West Virginia judge blocking a law that bans transgender students from girls' sports using the hashtag We've Got a Country to Save. Do you support the rights of individuals to play on the sports teams or use the restrooms that correspond with the gender they identify with, even if that's not the gender they were assigned at birth? And would you call yourself an ally to the LGBTQ community?
I call myself an ally to human beings, irrespective of their gender, irrespective of their sexual orientation. I don't think it is fair for a male transgender athlete to compete against a biological female athlete. I just don't think that's fair. I believe even Caitlyn Jenner has the same position. And one time, Martina Navratilova had the same position until she got hammered by the LGBT community, and she then began to walk away from that position. So I think that's just common sense.
So let me just make this personal for a second. My sister is transgender. She's lived her life as a woman for many years now. So would you not allow her to use the women's restroom?
If she is has made a transition from being a male to a female, a transition that has been done by whatever medical intervention there is, I see no reason why she ought not be able to use whatever bathroom she identifies as.
Okay, thank you. And my last question for you is this. You've said that you do believe in climate change and global warming, but you also said that you're unsure whether the changing climate is playing a role in our state's worsening wildfires. Are you able to confidently say that there is a link that exists between climate change and wildfires?
I think it is a factor, and what I've said is I do believe in climate change. I do believe our climate is getting warmer, and I do believe that human activity has something to do with it. What I don't believe in is climate change alarmism. I don't believe, as AOC does, I think she said 2 years ago that if we don't take dramatic action, we're all going to die. That's a paraphrase, but she said something to that effect. I think that's outrageous. I think we're smart enough to deal with the effects of climate change. And if there's rising water, we can deal with the effects of that. I also think there's a little bit of hypocrisy here. We have people like Barack Obama, who just purchased a home on the water in Martha's Vineyard for $12.7 million. I don't know whether or not he took out a 30-year mortgage, but if he really is concerned about rising waters, why would somebody buy a house right on the water like that when the water's going to rise and flood the whole park, and we're going to have all these catastrophic consequences that people like AOC are promoting? And I think it really is a shame that so many young people are afraid about their future because so many people like AOC are convincing people that unless dramatic action is taken, we're all going to suffer all sorts of negative consequences. And this idea of forcing us to go away from a fossil-based economy to a renewables-based economy when the renewables are not nearly as cost-effective, there are trade-offs here, and they're not nearly as unreliable, is also, I think, unfair because it drives up energy costs, and the people who pay those energy costs are disproportionately poor people because energy will take a larger bite out of their paycheck than it will for upper-income people.
All right, And Mr. Eller, we're going to return to Yusef Bey.
Larry, I want to follow up on that briefly. California obviously fancies itself as a leader in climate change policy and greenhouse gas reduction goals. Would you change anything that's in motion right now to, if you were governor, and how would you respond then in an appropriate way in your eyes to the changing climate and all the things that we're seeing?
Well, I think one of the problems is we've demonized nuclear.
Our food should be ready. It's under my name.
Okay.
We only have one remaining nuclear plant, that's Diablo. We've shut down San Onofre, and it's had a real consequence. And when I talk about this, people's hair get on fire because they think about 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl. Well, the technology is so much better than it was, and nobody, by the way, died. I do.
Okay, that's all I needed. Thank you.
And I think it's to be decommissioned in about 3 or 4 or 5 years. And just as when San Onofre was decommissioned, I think it led to some of these rolling brownouts. Again, things are trade-offs. Nothing is easy, nothing is pure. But I think the failure of our leaders to explain to Californians that there are trade-offs here is one of the reasons we're in the situation that we're in right now. We've passed water bond after water bond after water bond, infrastructure bond after infrastructure bond after infrastructure bond, billions of dollars set aside to build up on our infrastructure. And what happens? They study, lawsuit, and nothing's happening. And now we have a state that's 100% bigger than it was back in the 1970s, and we're not preparing for it. And I think that's outrageous.
I'm going to apologize again because I'm going to ask a question now, and then I'm going to turn to our colleague Tad Weber. But going back to one of the things you said earlier, you said that you would declare a homeless emergency. What would that mean, and how would that get people off the streets? What are the first 3 or 4 things that would be done in a homeless emergency?
Well, the homelessness emergency would be done to suspend CEQA so that I can unleash the developers and contractors who would be able to build low-cost housing and low-cost apartments. CEQA allows almost anybody to stop anything for almost any length of time. I've talked to a lot of developers, and a lot of them are completely demoralized, disillusioned, and many of them are building outside of California precisely because of that. I would also urge churches to get involved. Government does not know how to solve the homelessness problem. They think it's just about building houses first without dealing with the underlying reason why some people are on the streets. We have a certain percentage of people who are on the streets who are simply schizophrenic. By that I mean of danger to themselves or to others. I mentioned that Gavin Newsom was attacked by a homeless man, and he was defended by his security detail. And so some percentage, I'm not sure how many, literally have to be removed from the street and put in mental institutions for their own safety and for the safety of the rest of the homeless population. The rest of them are probably alcoholics, mentally ill, or have substance abuse problems, and they need to be treated. But once they're treated, where are they going to live? We don't have low-cost housing. We don't have low-cost apartments. One of the many people I consulted before I decided to run was Dr. Ben Carson, the former head of HUD. And he told me that he and Eric Garcetti, the mayor of Los Angeles, had agreed on a plan. There was a large amount of government land in California that would not be burdened by the rules and regulations, so low-cost housing could be built cheaply, and that they were going to be able to put the homeless people there. That plan did not go forward, obviously, because Donald Trump did not get a second term. But he tells me that Eric Garcetti had signed on the plan, and I've seen the plan, and it's workable. One of the things I asked Dr. Carson is this. I've been making a lot of promises if I were to get reelected, if I were to get elected governor of California. Excuse me. And one of the promises I've made is that I want to be able to get people off the ground, off the streets, put them in homes that are cost effective, and get some of them on their feet and become self-sufficient. Is that a doable promise? He said absolutely, and he talked to me about the plan that he and Eric Garcetti had agreed upon. So I think all of this is doable.
But building homes and things of that nature would take years. And what would you do with people in the meantime?
I'm not sure it would take years. I think it would take a matter of months. Low-cost housing won't take that long to build, provided the rules and regulations that burden and jack up the cost of housing are removed. I'm not sure how long it would take, but I don't think it would take forever. I think it's an eminently doable kind of thing to do. And I would feel that if I am elected governor, and if I'm lucky enough to be put in that position, and I fail to solve the homeless problem, then I will have been a failure. I'm going to make it one of my top priorities.
All right. So our colleague Tad Weber has been patiently waiting. My apologies, Tad. I turn it back to the script and to our friend Tad Weber.
No problem, but I am going to ask two questions. So, first one, Mr. Elder, you one time had told the Los Angeles Times, George Skelton, that California is ungovernable. So, why? Here's the first question: why do you become the chief executive of something that's ungovernable? And then I'll follow up when you're done.
Sure. I think what I told him is, when I was first asked to run for office, I said, no, thank you. California is ungovernable. And by that I meant we have a supermajority of Democrats in the Assembly, a supermajority of Democrats in the Senate. And I felt that if I were to veto something, and I would veto a lot of stuff, it would be overridden. I was wrong. I found out that a veto had not been overridden since the 1980s. And what happens when, for example, Arnold Schwarzenegger vetoed hundreds of bills, he goes to the public, he talks about why he vetoed it, he explains it, and constituents phone their state senator and phone their state assembly person and say, what were you smoking? And the veto is not overridden. And so I have a lot more power than I thought. I also have the power to declare a statewide emergency. I have the power of a line item veto. I have the power of appointing people on commissions. Many of the commissions are the ones that are imposing the rules and regulations that make life much more difficult here in California. I have the power to appoint the regions once their terms are expired, and the power to appoint people on the Public Utilities Commission. So there's a lot of power that I'll have even when dealing with a hostile legislature. And the other thing I'll have is the bully pulpit. I think I have the ability to explain things in ways that Joe and Joan Sixpack can understand. And if I do that, maybe, just maybe, I can get people to understand why we ought to rethink our attitude towards nuclear, why we need to have more underground water storage so that 50% of the water is not drained off in the Pacific Ocean, so that we can prepare for years when we have drought. I think I can explain to people that drought is God-made, but shortages are man-made in ways that I think a lot of people can't explain. And so I have a lot more power, and the more I got into this, the more I became optimistic that maybe, just maybe, somebody named Larry Elder can do a little something about some of the problems plaguing California.
Okay. In your view, was what happened at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th an insurrection or a peaceful protest?
Please. I object to the word insurrection, but I call it a riot. Of course it was a riot. A bunch of idiots stormed the Capitol building. I guess they thought they were going to somehow be able to overturn the election. I think it was hideous. It was awful. And every single person should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Peaceful protest? Come on.
All right, we will now go to...
The peaceful protest language comes from a Republican.
Well, I could give you lots of bonehead language coming from Democrats, and to impute that to you would be unfair. Don't impute that to me either.
I'm not imputing it to you. I just used it in a question. Thanks.
Fair enough.
All right, we now go to Jack Oman.
Mr. Elder, I want to apologize to you for using the phrase torrent of words. I'm somewhat used to being accused of being torrential myself, and you're a professional broadcaster, so I apologize to you. You are broadcasting currently for the Epoch Times, which is funded broadcaster. So, Mr. Elder, I want to apologize to you for using the phrase torrent of words. I'm somewhat used to being accused of being torrential myself, and you're a professional broadcaster, so I apologize to you. You are broadcasting currently for the Epoch Times, which is funded by the Falun Gong. Do you support the views of the Falun Gong? Do you support the Epoch Times wink and nod encouragement of QAnon?
You know, I don't know that much about either one of those things. I do know that they came to me and asked me to make videos for them, and I do. And I think the videos that I make are responsible videos. If the LA Times came to me and asked me to make videos for them, I would, but they haven't. I have been born and raised in Los Angeles. I've written a half a dozen books. 2 of them were New York Times bestsellers. 2 of them were LA Times bestsellers. The LA Times has never reviewed any of my books. I also did a documentary that came out Juneteenth last year called Uncle Tom, The Oral History of the Black Conservative. It's a Malone film directed by a friend named Justin Malone. It made more money than all of the 5 documentaries that were nominated for Best Picture combined. It had a higher IMDb rating than any of the ones that were nominated, including the one that ultimately won. The LA Times has never reviewed any of my works, never reviewed the documentary, even though I approached them. I've written over 1,000 articles since April of 1998. The LA Times has never published one. I only mention that to say that I find it interesting that I get a publication that gives a damn about some of the things I do, where my own local newspaper does not. So I'd be happy to do the videos for the LA Times if only they cared about anything that I've ever done. But the LA Times has shown not only indifference towards me, but also stridency towards me. And I think it's pretty unfair the way that I have been treated by much of the media here in California, particularly the LA Times.
Well, I'll bring it up with Sewell Chan next time I talk to him. I guess my question is, do you have some intellectual curiosity about the funding of the Epoch Times?
I've met some of their executives. They seem like reasonable people to me. And many of the articles that I've read in the Epoch Times seem like reasonable articles as well. I don't know anything about that organization that you mentioned. All I know is that they approached me. They gave me 4 paid documentaries that I think, videos that I think are sensible videos. And I've done videos about crime, about homelessness, about systemic racism, about critical race theory, about reparations, and I think they're responsible videos.
You've done about 135 videos for the Epoch Times, is that correct?
I don't know how many I've done. I've done 3 a week since I got my relationship with them.
Okay, and
I've
so
been with them for maybe about a year or so, so that sounds right.
I find it rather curious that you don't know anything about the Falun Gong.
Well, I apologize for your finding it curious. I find it curious that you don't really seem to find it odd that I, Larry Elder, born and raised in South Central, my local newspaper has never published any of my columns. My local newspaper has not reviewed any of my books, even though 2 of them were on the LA Times bestseller list. My local newspaper has not at all reviewed my documentary, even though, as I pointed out, it was a critical and financial success. It seems to me that ought to raise as much curiosity in your mind as the origins of the Epoch Times.
Well, that's a side issue. There's no question about that.
It's a side issue. I don't think it's a side issue. I think it's an important issue. One of the reasons that I believe that Democrats outnumber Republicans in this state is because people like myself are cut off, and a lot of people have never heard it.
I don't believe, as AOC does. I think she said 2 years ago that if we don't take dramatic action, we're all going to die. That's a paraphrase, but she said something to that effect. I think that's outrageous. I think we're smart enough to deal with the effects of climate change, and if there's rising water, we can deal with the effects of that. I also think there's a little bit of hypocrisy here. We have people like Barack Obama, who just purchased a home on the water in Martha's Vineyard for $12.7 million. I don't know whether or not he took out a 30-year mortgage, but if he really is concerned about rising waters, why would somebody buy a house right on the water like that when the water's going to rise and flood the whole part, and we're going to have all these catastrophic consequences that people like AOC are promoting? And I think it really is a shame that so many young people are afraid about their future because so many people like AOC are convincing people that unless dramatic action is taken, we're all going to suffer all sorts of and this idea of forcing us to go away from a fossil-based economy.
just passed a church, and the sign said, "A mom is a hug direct from God. Happy Mother's Day."
That's cute. What?
Never mind, you're obviously too busy.
Wow. What the fuck? I cannot find.
Control affirmative action are absolutely inconsistent with that. You are not a libertarian, Bill. You're a progressive or a liberal. I don't know what you are, but you're not a libertarian.
You know what, Larry? I don't really want to have this discussion right now. Is that okay?
Fine, fair enough.
And that's like all I can find with those two speaking to each other on the internet.
That seems to be the most they've spoken to each other in their life.
It's not. They used to speak a lot before that, apparently.
Well, that's just downright weird. Maybe ABC has censored those episodes of their own show because they're leftists themselves. Who knows?
Someone censored it. Find it.
I guarantee you Bill Maher didn't censor it.
Roll down your window.
GSTV presents Better Together with Maria Menounos, Tip of the Day. Did you know that research shows over 70% of dogs exhibit some form of anxiety? Wellness veterinarian Dr. Karen Becker says that increasing the amount of daily exercise your dog gets is one of the most effective ways to decrease stress in your dog's life. And it's free. So that's it. Check us out on Apple Podcasts or so much content. Here are some search tips to find exactly what you want to watch. Type the word Netflix in the search bar and it will bring up every original Netflix movie and series. Try sites like Flixable or Just Watch to comb through Netflix's catalog with advanced search terms. CNET.com for all things tech.
Stop inside to grab a refreshing Slurpee. Now available here and at other select locations.
GSTV presents Better Together with Maria Menounos, Tip of the Day. Did you know that research shows over 70% of dogs exhibit some form of anxiety? Wellness veterinarian Dr. Karen Becker says that increasing the amount of daily exercise your dog gets is one of the most effective ways to decrease stress in your dog's life. And it's free. For more tips, check us out on Apple Podcasts or MariaMenounos.com.
Thirsty? How about now? Twisted Tea is a refreshing hard iced tea that combines the smooth taste of real brewed tea with an extra kick of alcohol. So stock up while you're filling up and look for the bright yellow cans in our cooler. Keep it twisted.
Hello everyone, this is Jenner News. Here's what we're looking forward to today. Twitter's implementing a crisis misinformation policy that in an attempt to stop misinformation about Russia's invasion of Ukraine and other major crises. The change is part of a larger attempt at cracking down on misinformation that has direct impacts on major world events or crises. Cheddar News, look forward to what's next.
Try Lemon Zero in a variety of flavors. Get 3 cans for $5 today at Speedway.
I'm Alex, and this is a real customer review. I love that we can stay in the car while my car's being serviced, and my kids also love watching them change our oil.
Valvoline Instant Oil Change. Service you can see, experts you can trust. That's all I'm trying for.
Did someone say 3 bonus points? Register today on the Speedway app to get 1,500 bonus points. Plus, get exclusive in-app offers with Speedy Deals. Now that's a deal worth talking about.
You're watching Speedway TV. With Nick Moore, it's important. Nice and cold and ready to grab and go inside. Come in for details.
Quench your thirst with something new. Stop inside to grab a refreshing Slurpee. Now available here and at other select locations.
GSTV presents Better Together with Maria Menounos, Tip of the Day. Did you know that research shows over 70% of dogs exhibit some form of anxiety? Wellness veterinarian
Amazing experience. Speed, great service, that's what we do. Valvoline Instant Oil Change. Service you can see, experts you can trust.
We already took care of everything. Plus, the oil change visit was fun. Fun and safe. That's what we do.
Did someone say 3 bonus points? Register today on the Speedway app to get 1,500 bonus points. Plus, get exclusive in-app offers with Speedy Deals. Now that's a deal worth talking about.
inside to grab. It was amazing, fast and courteous. Speed, great service, that's what we do.
Did someone say free bonus points? Register today on the Speedway app to get 1,500 bonus points. Plus, get exclusive in-app offers with Speedy Deals. Now that's a deal worth talking about.
You're watching Speedway TV. Get more with Speed Reports.
Did you know that research shows over 70% of dogs exhibit some form of anxiety? Wellness veterinarian Dr. Karen Becker says that increasing the amount of feelings.
Growing about elder, there's a magazine called the Atlantic Magazine, which is center left, and they just published an article not long ago called "The California Dream is Dying," talking about the failure of us to prepare for energy, the failure of us to prepare for the growing water needs, and the high cost of living. And they talked about a lot of young people leaving California. And as you well know, for the first time in our state's history, to my knowledge, people are leaving California. There's a net migration out of California. And when you're looking at people making between $50,000 and $100,000 a year, when they leave, the number one reason that they cite is the high cost of living. And that was one of the big points made in this long article in the Atlantic called "The California Dream is Dying."
All right, so I apologize to Panos. I know we're jumping all over the place.
I didn't think that I'd ever see the building where you were. Now, as you found out what it meant as you grew older, did you have some idea of what it might mean, what it could mean, as opposed to what it may have turned out to be?
You know, my grandfather was an interesting man. He, of course, dominated our lives. And he felt that as these rights were vindicated, that we had an obligation to measure up, to use them. I'll give you a separate example. Well, in that sense, it could, in the sense that, I mean, we all, when we do opinion, in the 1890s, possible, and yes, just in a practical way, for us all to have, or at least have a possibility to have the same education. I mean, it's, you know, if you look, for example, I happen to be a big sports fan.
But then it goes on from there, and it gets a little bit easier once you start there. But I would have to start with
Now, one you picked out for special mention is Sister Mary Virgilius.
That's right.
Tell me about her.
She is still alive. She is mid-90s. She is an Irish immigrant. She went in the convent in 1931. She was,
As far as our diocese was concerned, she was an agave.
Anybody can tell you what to do. You know, anybody can tell you to go to the store to buy some snuff, some honeybee snuff, or whatever they want you, or a continuity of events, a series of events in our lives, our daily lives, that had the greatest influence.
You write about your grandfather being called boy by a white woman and struggling to restrain himself from stabbing a white man after another assault. What effect did these have on you?
Oh, I don't know. As a kid, I think it had a great effect on my grandfather, which in turn had a great effect on me. He was an independent man as a result of things that happened in his life. He was a man who thought that, when you talk or going to deal with it, you're the greatest man we know. And some people seem emboldened by those sorts of things and take off in the wrong direction and do something that can ultimately be self-destructive. He did the hard thing to hold his discipline, and it's a lesson to me.
Did I take your internet again?
Something that can ultimately be self-destructive. He did the hard thing to hold his discipline, and it's a lesson to me, to my brother, that even when you might feel strongly about something, or feel justified in doing something that could be self-destructive, that you must do something that's more prudent and certainly beneficial and constructive in the long run.
Sort of. I'm maybe putting too much in this, sort of an exercise in self-control.
That's right.
Look at how I'm reacting to this. This is a lesson for you.
Remember what he said. That's precisely the point.
Remember, as I said earlier in my memoirs, he always said to us that I will never tell you to do as I say. I will always tell you to do as I do. That is a hard burden to put on yourself, because we did indeed watch it. We were kids. We were always around it. It isn't like today where parents are hauling kids around to soccer. And it's like the parents are working for the kids now. It was the other way around when we were kids. We were like the little ducklings following the leader. Were there any incidents in the news when you were growing up in Savannah that let you know who you were and what some people thought about you, or how you ought to think about yourself? Oh, I can remember being herded into our little den where the Motorola TV was, and the news was a big deal in those days, and we all had to watch what was going on in Little Rock and being horrified. And later on, we'd see the hosings, and we'd watch what happened in Birmingham, the fire hoses, the dogs, things like that, and it really, absolutely had a tremendous impact on all of us. I'm the same age as the Little Rock Nine, and they had a big influence on me because they were my age, and I saw people like me in Birmingham. I'm guessing in '63, in the 8th grade. So these are children roughly in your age. Did the fact that these young people were doing this speak to you more profoundly than it might have done had they been older people? Well, first, I was in the 9th grade when that happened. In 9th grade, as a young kid, you begin to feel your oats a little bit. And you begin to have the sense that we should be doing something. And I can remember my grandfather distinctly telling us, no one.
Experience at Holy Cross when you joined a protest in Harvard Square in 1970, and then began to ask yourself, again according to this interview in the San Diego Union Tribune, why was I doing this rather than using my intellect? Explain these circumstances.
Well, that goes back to my grandfather. And I know I always dragged around what I thought his...
I had...
While at school, I spent a lot of time. I'd always felt that those of us to whom much is given, of him much is expected. And we'd always, whether we had
beans or peas, we always took it to those
extra or needed something. And so it became natural as someone who was going to become a priest. It was a calling that you would help other people. Why else? I mean, how do you show love but to reach out to those?
Fortunate. And so you started tutoring. I worked in community programs, even in college and law school, mental hospitals. We did the free breakfast program, and that's
days. And so when I got to law school, I worked. In those days, we talked about being in community.
What was the decision to go to law school? Again, is it tied to helping others?
Yeah, it's tied to going back to Savannah. That's the point I was going to get to. It was a part of the vocation that I received a series of rejections from Atlanta, and that is why I wound up in Jefferson City, Missouri.
You know, when Maynard Jackson stopped being mayor after 2 terms, no law firm in Atlanta made him an offer. He had to go to Chicago. And anyway, so you end up in Jefferson City, Missouri, and you're doing, as I understand it, mostly tax work and other kinds of things.
I started out with really. I did. That was the beginning. It was really interesting because you show up. Of course, you have to pass the bar exam. I lived with Mrs. Margaret Bush Wilson that summer, which was great. It was a great learning experience in many ways. And 14, I became a member of the Bar of Missouri, and September 17, I argued my first case before the Supreme Court of Missouri. So you can imagine what I was like. Sure. I was 26 years old, and but the job was great. I mean, there was an enormous amount of work to do, and this was purely it's one of these swim or sink situations. Right. There was very little supervision because people didn't have time. The great part about it was that the work came to you in an indiscriminate manner. There was so much of it, it just poured in, and you just did it as it came in. It was a wonderful experience. The other great part of it was that I worked for a person who was a good man. So even today, I advise my law students or any kids who ask me for advice to work for the person, not the job. Because again, it's sort of like learning from my grandfather. You can learn so much by observing a good person and having a good person work supervise.
Is that good person, John Danforth?
Jack Danforth. Yeah. He was just a wonderful man. And one thing, I'll just be brief here, that he showed me, is he never mixed the politics of his job with the function of the office. So we were never confused, and we never had to change things because it might be in his political interest.
You know, he strikes me as an unusual person, not necessarily in Missouri, but an unusual person, generally speaking. He's deeply religious, and he seems to me to be a person who works his religion, lives his religion in ways that other people who say, I'm a Christian, really don't.
He is a deeply religious man, and he did not wear that, though, on his sleeves when we worked for him. And we knew he was a minister, but we never saw it. And it was only years later that I saw that. But he is just a good man.
Now, is there a point in your life, and I want to take you back to school days, where you think to yourself, and maybe not articulate it this way, you say to yourself, I am a leader. Other people follow me. Other kids follow me. Is there a moment or a time or a place or an occasion where that strikes you?
No.
Never at all? No. Not in grade school, not in high school?
I was never a leader in that sense. I didn't run for office. I wasn't a vocal kid. I was just like I am at the court. I just quiet. And I didn't ask any questions throughout my years in school. I wouldn't be one that I would point out that led anybody to do anything.
Well, in college, aren't you active in forming the Black Student Group?
That was because I could type. I had my typewriter. I had a
like
Smith
the woman
Corona.
who becomes the secretary.
Yeah. That's why I became the secretary, because I had a typewriter and I could type and I could edit.
Well, surely it had to be more than that. Well, there must be some reason that people look to you for this.
I did, when I first arrived on campus, the head of the Black Student Union was a wonderful young man named Arthur Martin. And he heard that I could type, and I was a transfer student. I hadn't been there the year before. And so he brought over the proposed constitution and told me the changes they wanted to make, and it was a handwritten portions of it. And he said, would you type it up? And I said, oh, fine. So I sat at my Smith Corona and typed it up and made the edits, and that was it. I was reliable, let's put it that way. And this is something, again, that came from my grandfather. He sent us off. He said, take the tractor and go back to the field and plow. And he would go back and inspect later on. You had to be reliable without supervision. So I was reliable in that way. But no, I would never, my classmates to this day, I was probably one of the least likely people. to see leading anything. It's just, it just wasn't, I didn't see myself there.
So there's never a time when you said, I can lead people to do something. I have the ability within myself to get others to follow me. And I don't mean follow you blindly, but to follow you.
No.
Never told.
No, I was more independent. I would think things through and make my own decisions. I probably wasn't a great follower either. If anything, I would say I was just independent. It's more like my grandfather. That I would participate. That I was a part of lots of things. I was a part of the Black Student Union. I was a part of some other organizations. I was a part of the school newspaper. So I did all sorts of things. But I would not have pegged me. The only thing I could say about the leadership part of it was that I thought for myself. I like to think things through, and I love the idea of talking and persuading. I think we've kind of gotten away from that in the society.
No, but that's a little bit of what I mean. Talking and persuading. So you have an idea and a way of thinking, and here's another fellow or classmate or student who thinks differently or doesn't think quite the same way, and you can convince that person. Isn't that some aspect where you active leadership?
Well, if you define it that way, yes. I love that. To open up the mind and to really think that, look, you don't have to agree with me, but let's talk about this. Let's talk about whether it's philosophy or history or art. Let's just talk about it. Or it could be politics. It could be the Constitution. Because the way that we've kind of gotten now is that it's almost like it's become a religious thing. That there's a religiosity to the sort of the opinions that we have. That then it was like you could go, I remember in law school, you could go over and there'd be $1 pitcher beer. It was back in the days when I enjoyed beer, and we'd talk and the ideas were free flowing. I found those to be wonderful, like the old coffee shops, you know. So if you define it as willing to exchange and debate ideas, then yeah, that's a part of leadership.
And do you think?
I think they didn't say that politely, and they didn't call me Clarence then, but they said go talk to him because he's got some ideas. But I was interested in everything. You know, if someone had a good argument, I was interested in looking at that argument and just take the time. I think that's fascinating, and it's a fascinating part about meeting people because they might come from a different part of the country. They have a different sort of education. They think a different way, and it made education exciting. And I think when someone comes in and they already have all the answers, that's a boring person. Because now they're just sort of preaching to you. Whereas I was more interested in just processing it all and thinking it through. So yeah, I think there'd be times people wouldn't say that generously. He has some good ideas, but they'd say, well, he thinks differently. You might want to go over and say something.
I bet some people said it. When you get to the EEOC, you're leading an agency of 3,000 people, and clearly, just by nature of the job, you're a leader. Did you think of yourself in that way there? I know you're a modest guy, but
realistic.
Did you think that I'm in charge of this? I run this.
Well, it's like actually it started at the Department of Education in 1981, about this time in 1981, and all of a sudden you show up. You're in your I was 32 years old, and there are about 800-900 people in this organization. There's some contentiousness, and I said, "Oh my goodness, what am I going to do now?" So you're sort of selected, and you're put in charge. And again, it is sink or swim about these jobs. How would you define vision?
How would you define vision?
I'm not that creative. I had a say, let's just take EEOC, when I was leading there. I had the sense that an organization should, no matter where it was going, some people might have different policies, but the machinery of it should work. That processing should work. That you get in your car and you might decide that you want to drive over to Northwest, but you want it to work to get to Northwest. I might decide I want to go to Northeast. Now, we may go different directions, but in both cases, our expectation is that the machinery of our vehicle works. That's what I thought about EEOC. First of all, let's just make it work. And so my view was to have an organization that worked and that the people who were the integral to it was not me, I was a political appointee. The people who were integral were the career people. So wherever I was, whatever I was doing, the career people had to buy into it. It was their organization. It was their careers there.
They'd grown, some of them had grown up there, etc. So
Vision, it was more that. And also to make sure we had tens of thousands of cases coming. How do we process these? Now there's going to be a tiny fraction that we disagree about, but the overwhelming bulk of it, we all agree on. These people need to have their rights vindicated. And of course there are glitches along the way, but if there was a vision, it was to have the machinery work, to have it work consistent with the statute, and to have the people who were there as career people to be the major players in that.
Okay, and then philosophy.
You know, I don't know if I had a management philosophy other than that a job worth doing is worth doing well, and that everyone should be treated fairly. I was not one of these people. I'm not real tolerant of people who don't do their work. I'm not going to tell you that. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that. I'm not tolerant of me not doing my work. And my view is more like my grandfather's. You are here to do a job, and you do it. If you're not going to do it, you're not going to be here. On the other hand, if you do your job and do it
say exactly what I think. I'm not
with you. And I do believe that it is critical as a manager for credibility, for the organization, for yourself, to level with people. That if you want to be positive, that you tell them in a measured way exactly what you think in a positive way. If you have to bring unpleasant news, there is a decent way to do it without destroying another human being. The other thing that, we had a very
diverse population-wise.
Organization probably in the government. So one of the things that we have to be clear about is that we start on a very human level. We are dealing with human beings. Everybody's a human being here. I don't pigeonhole people. You don't treat blacks a certain way, Hispanics another way, mixed race another way, Native Americans another way, people who are disabled, people with disabilities another way. You don't do that. A human being is a human being is a human being. And what I found, yes, people have particular problems because of certain attributes, but that doesn't identify them. They are human beings, and I found that worked far better than putting people in different pigeonholes and then treating them accordingly.
Now, some people categorize the making of leaders in three ways. A, great people cause great events. B, movement.
I think I just have to take that as assume that I am. But I think that at times things are demanded of you, and you could either say no, and you think about your life, if there were things that were demanded at a certain time. I remember when, and I relate this in my book. When I got here, I spoke with Justice Marshall, and I said, "Boy, I'm sitting here talking to Justice Marshall, and I'm like a kid, wow." 2.5 hours later, it was supposed to be a 10-minute meeting. During that 2.5 hours, he said, I said to him that if I had had the courage, he was going around the South arguing these separate legal cases, and eventually leading up to Brown, that I wish I could have been there with him, but I don't know if I would have had the courage. And he just sort of leaned up at his desk and he just said, I had to do in my time what I had to do, and you have to do in your time. And I think it might come down to that for leaders that we're called on to do certain things at a certain time. And I do see it as a calling more than ambition or anything else. And I can't say it's planned. I don't know which of those definitions fit. I think that they all might be right to a certain extent. I think it might be an uncertain calculus that leads us where we are.
Do you see your legitimacy as a leader grounded in your ability to persuade people to follow your vision, or in your ability to articulate the agenda of a movement?
Well, for us, it's different here at the court. When I was at EEOC, it was leading people in a direction.
Right.
And one of the most gratifying things was when I was leaving EEOC to have people who were somewhat reluctant and reticent when I arrived to be so supportive and to just endearing and loving because we had gone in the right direction. And whether no one else knew it, they knew it. And that's all that mattered. Now, up here, this is different. This is more monastic. It's quiet. It's just like this room. We work alone. We have law clerks. I work at home. It's more contemplative.
But they should join you. They should sign on with you. I mean,